Hey guys, tonight we begin with some of the strangest medieval habits that somehow convinced entire populations that danger was simply a personality trait. Before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let us begin with one of medieval Europe's most confusing relationships: humanity versus basic hygiene. Today, if someone told you that bathing too often was dangerous, you would probably stare at them for several uncomfortable seconds. Medieval Europe, however, occasionally looked at a bathtub with the same suspicion modern people reserve for mysterious emails asking for bank information. In several periods and regions, people believed opening the pores through hot water allowed disease to enter the body more easily. The logic seemed reasonable at the time. Baths make the skin warm. Warm skin opens pores. Open pores invite invisible dangers. Therefore, cleanliness itself becomes suspicious. Unfortunately, disease did not receive the memo. People still lived in crowded towns with livestock wandering nearby, waste sometimes ending up in streets, and water sources that occasionally had a complicated relationship with purity. Yet despite this, some people limited bathing dramatically. Instead, perfumes, oils, herbs, and layers of expensive fabric stepped in to negotiate with reality. Nobles especially enjoyed the idea that scent could defeat circumstance. Imagine entering a banquet hall filled with lavender oils, flower extracts, incense, and approximately 17 different attempts to overpower facts. Underneath all of this, however, medieval life continued doing what medieval life always did. People worked, sweated, travelled, cooked over fires, and existed very enthusiastically. The result was an atmosphere historians politely describe as distinctive. Now, to be fair, not everyone avoided washing. Public bathhouses existed, and some regions maintained stronger bathing cultures than others, but fear and superstition occasionally turned cleanliness into risk management, and that is where things become strangely human, because people were not trying to make themselves miserable. They were trying to survive. Humans have always created explanations for dangers they don't understand. Sometimes we blame spirits, sometimes stars, sometimes tiny invisible organisms nobody has discovered yet, and sometimes apparently we blame soap. Imagine spending your entire life carefully avoiding something that would have quietly helped you, simply because the world around you confidently insisted otherwise. There is something oddly familiar about that. The medieval world was filled with intelligent people making decisions using incomplete information, which is honestly much closer to modern life than we enjoy admitting, because centuries from now, people might look back at some of our own habits and wonder what exactly we thought we were doing. History has a habit of making everyone eventually look a little ridiculous. Medieval Europe simply got there first. The strange thing about medieval life is that danger rarely arrived wearing a dramatic cape and announcing itself like a villain in a story. Most of the time it arrived disguised as a completely normal idea that everyone around you accepted without question. Which brings us to one of the most remarkable examples of collective confidence ever created: medieval animal medicine and the deeply committed belief that if something looked strange enough, it probably had healing powers. Imagine waking up with a headache in a medieval town. Today you might drink water, rest, maybe take medicine. Medieval you, however, might find yourself listening to a local healer explaining that the solution involved powdered animal parts, herbs gathered under very specific moon conditions, and instructions that somehow became more concerning with every sentence. Because medieval medicine often followed something called sympathetic reasoning. The basic idea was surprisingly simple. If something resembled a body part or symbolically represented a condition, it must somehow help treat it. Walnuts looked vaguely like brains, therefore perhaps good for the head. Red plants resembled blood, therefore perhaps useful for blood conditions. And animals quickly entered this strange equation as well. Fox lungs, owl feathers, ground bones, animal fat mixtures, and ingredients that sound less like medicine and more like the contents of a very confused backpack became part of treatments across different regions. To medieval minds, this wasn't absurd. It was logic. Different logic, perhaps, but logic nonetheless. The world itself was viewed almost like a giant system, of signs left behind by God or nature waiting to be interpreted. Everything meant something. Every animal had qualities humans admired or feared. Wolves represented strength. Eagles represented vision. Bears represented power. So if you could somehow absorb those qualities, perhaps by consuming part of the animal or carrying pieces of it close to your body, maybe some of that strength transferred to you. Humanity has always loved shortcuts. Even now, people search for magical solutions hidden behind complicated promises. Medieval people simply had fewer scientific tools available for testing those promises, and this occasionally produced some astonishing outcomes. Some people carried animal teeth as protection charms. Others wore tiny pouches containing herbs and strange ingredients around their necks, believing they prevented illness. Certain animal parts became fashionable remedies because once enough people repeated an idea, it stopped feeling unusual and started feeling traditional. Tradition has a remarkable ability to disguise weirdness. Something can sound ridiculous until everyone around you nods confidently and says, "Yes, we've always done that." Then suddenly refusing becomes the unusual choice. Imagine standing in a medieval market while someone calmly sells dried lizard powder, with complete confidence explaining that it restores health and energy. The truly fascinating part is not that people bought it. The fascinating part is that people probably recommended it to friends afterward, because once humans invest belief into something, they become surprisingly loyal customers. Of course, some remedies accidentally worked. Certain herbs genuinely contained useful medicinal properties, even if people misunderstood why. Honey helps wounds. Some plants reduce pain. Willow bark contains compounds related to aspirin. Medieval medicine occasionally stumbled into success almost by accident. But accidents mixed with confidence create dangerous combinations. Because once something works, one time, people begin assuming it works every time. And confidence spreads quickly, especially during fear. Imagine a village where sickness appears suddenly. Nobody understands bacteria. Nobody understands viruses. People only understand that neighbours who looked healthy yesterday now look weak today. Fear arrives faster than explanation. Fear always does. And when fear enters a room, certainty becomes valuable, even if the certainty itself is completely wrong. A healer saying, "I know exactly what to do," feels comforting. Humans prefer certainty over confusion, even when certainty is wearing a hat made entirely of bad ideas. So people followed treatments because doing something felt safer than doing nothing. Even if that something involved carrying unusual objects or consuming ingredients nobody today would willingly place anywhere near their mouths. Looking back, it's tempting to laugh at medieval mistakes. But honestly, we should probably be careful with that. Because the uncomfortable truth hiding inside history is this: humans have always wanted simple answers for frightening problems. Medieval people weren't foolish. They were simply navigating uncertainty with the tools available to them. And uncertainty has a way of making strange ideas look surprisingly reasonable. The truly dangerous thing about medieval trends was that they rarely announced themselves as dangerous. Nobody gathered in town squares saying, "Good news everyone, today's activity may permanently damage your health." No, most bad ideas arrived dressed as wisdom, tradition, or status. Which brings us to one of medieval Europe's strangest obsessions: miracle cures and travelling wonder sellers. People who moved from town to town carrying bottles, powders, mysterious oils, and enough confidence to power a small kingdom. Imagine a market day somewhere in medieval Europe. Farmers arrive with grain and livestock. Merchants open cloth bundles filled with spices and tools. Children run between carts. Voices echo through narrow streets. Then suddenly a loud voice cuts through the noise. A man standing on a wooden crate raises a small glass bottle toward the crowd and announces that he possesses a liquid capable of restoring youth, curing weakness, improving digestion, strengthening the heart, calming the mind, increasing energy, protecting against disease, and possibly improving your luck while you're at it. Now immediately modern people hear that list and think, absolutely not. Medieval people, however, sometimes heard something very different. They heard hope, and hope is powerful, especially when real medicine is limited. Especially when disease appears without warning, especially when your neighbour's cousin's uncle swears he took this miracle liquid and suddenly felt better 3 days later. Testimonials existed long before social media. Humans have always trusted stories from other humans. A miracle seller did not need scientific studies, he needed confidence. Dramatic presentation, and preferably one enthusiastic customer somewhere in the crowd saying, Actually, I think my back pain improved. That was enough. Suddenly attention spreads. People gather closer, because deep down everyone wants to believe somebody finally discovered the answer. These miracle mixtures could contain almost anything. Herbs, alcohol, animal ingredients, minerals, oils, unknown substances, and occasionally ingredients that probably should never have entered human bodies under any circumstances. Some remedies contained mercury, others included substances now considered dangerous enough that modern warning labels would require their own warning labels. But nobody knew, because how could they? Chemistry was primitive. Medical understanding remained incomplete. People weren't consuming strange things because they enjoyed risk. They were consuming them because suffering creates urgency, and urgency changes decision-making. Imagine waking every morning with constant pain or weakness, while watching medicine repeatedly fail. Then someone arrives promising relief. Suddenly, skepticism becomes harder. Suddenly, impossible ideas start feeling possible. The mind begins negotiating with hope. Maybe this works. Maybe this helps. Maybe this finally changes something. Humans have always done this. We still do. Different products, perhaps. Different packaging. Same emotions. And there was another reason these miracle sellers succeeded. They understood theatre. Medieval life lacked constant entertainment. There was no television, no internet, no endless streams of distraction. A travelling seller brought excitement. Crowds formed naturally. Stories spread naturally. Spectacle itself became part of the product. Because if someone looked important enough and sounded certain enough, people often assumed authority followed automatically. Humans remain surprisingly vulnerable to confidence. We see certainty and mistake it for knowledge. We see performance and mistake it for truth. Medieval people were not uniquely gullible. They were uniquely human. Some miracle sellers probably believed completely in what they sold. Others almost certainly understood exactly what they were doing. But either way, consequences remained real. People delayed better treatments while chasing impossible solutions. Dangerous substances entered bodies already weakened by illness. Small problems became larger ones. Larger problems became final ones. And through it all, markets continued filling with voices promising health in tiny bottles. Because where fear exists, certainty becomes profitable. It always has. And history quietly reminds us that the most convincing person in the room is not always the most informed one. Sometimes they are simply the loudest. And now we arrive at perhaps the strangest part of this entire journey, because after looking at dangerous fashion, impossible cures, bizarre beliefs, and trends that somehow convinced ordinary people to willingly argue with common sense, we begin noticing something unexpected. The story was never really about medieval people at all. It was about people. Because when we imagine the Middle Ages, we often picture a world separated from us by castles, swords, candles, and stone walls. We imagine ourselves standing safely outside history, looking inward, quietly laughing and thinking, how could anyone possibly believe that? But history has a habit of becoming uncomfortable the moment it holds up a mirror. Because if you strip away the armour and the horse carts, and replace them with screens and advertisements and modern packaging, the emotions underneath begin looking strangely familiar. Medieval people followed dangerous trends because they wanted status. People still do. Medieval people ignored risks because everyone around them insisted something was normal. People still do. Medieval people chased miracle solutions because uncertainty frightened them, and hope felt better than waiting. People still do. Human beings have always shared the same strange operating system. The details change, the scenery changes, the clothing becomes significantly better, but the instincts remain remarkably similar. We want acceptance, we want certainty, we want control over things that feel unpredictable. And when life becomes confusing, humans begin reaching for stories that make uncertainty feel smaller. Sometimes those stories help us. Sometimes they quietly walk us toward disaster, while smiling politely the entire time. Think about those nobles wearing absurd shoes through muddy streets because status mattered more than mobility. Think about those cosmetic mixtures promising beauty while slowly poisoning the people using them. Think about bloodletting, miracle cures, impossible beliefs, and all the confidence surrounding ideas that eventually collapsed under reality. Nobody woke up trying to make terrible decisions. Nobody gathered around saying, "Today, I choose avoidable mistakes." They believed they were making sensible choices using the information available to them. And that is what makes history fascinating. Bad decisions almost never feel bad while people are making them. They feel reasonable. They feel justified. They feel normal. The danger usually reveals itself later, much later sometimes. There is also something strangely comforting hidden in all this. Because despite every terrible trend, despite every strange belief, and every disaster disguised as wisdom, people kept moving forward. Knowledge improved slowly, painfully slowly sometimes. Mistakes accumulated. Lessons accumulated too. Humans learned. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but gradually. The same species drilling holes into skulls eventually learned surgery. The same species trusting miracle bottles eventually built modern medicine. The same species convinced that disease entered through bathwater eventually discovered germs. Progress often looks less like brilliance and more like generations of people repeatedly saying, well, maybe let's stop doing that. History moves forward one correction at a time, one embarrassing realization at a time, one collective moment of, actually this might have been a terrible idea at a time, and perhaps that's the quiet lesson hiding beneath all the strange stories. The people of the Middle Ages were not failures wandering through darkness waiting for modern intelligence to arrive and rescue them. They were simply humans standing where knowledge ended, trying to see beyond the edge with limited light, just like us. Because centuries from now, people will probably study our own habits with equal confusion. They may stare at things we consider normal and wonder what exactly we thought we were doing. They might laugh at our trends, our fears, our blind spots, our confidence, and honestly, they will probably deserve to. History eventually humbles everyone. That seems to be one of its favourite hobbies. So tonight, as the room grows quiet and the lights dim, remember something strange. The medieval world isn't entirely gone. Pieces of it still live quietly inside us, in our desire to fit in our search for certainty, in our willingness to trust familiar ideas simply because everyone else does. The castle walls disappeared. The instincts stayed. And somewhere across centuries of time, medieval humanity quietly whispers a reminder that remains surprisingly relevant. The most dangerous ideas are rarely the ones that look dangerous. They're usually the ones that look completely normal. But perhaps the strangest thing about medieval history isn't the shoes, the bloodletting, the miracle potions, or the dangerous trends that somehow convinced entire populations to gamble with their own survival. No, the strangest thing is realizing that every generation believes it has finally become the sensible one. Every civilization quietly assumes it has escaped the mistakes of the people who came before. The Romans probably believed it. Medieval Europe certainly believed it. People living 200 years ago believed it. And right now, somewhere at this exact moment, millions of us are probably believing it too. Human beings have always looked backward and seen foolishness while looking forward and seeing progress. But history has an uncomfortable sense of humour. Because eventually time flips the page, and suddenly the people doing the laughing become the people being studied. Somewhere in the future, historians may sit in climate-controlled rooms reading about our own strange habits. They may examine advertisements, trends, internet culture, diets, social movements, beauty standards and health crazes with expressions of absolute confusion. They may stare at records of our lives and quietly ask, wait, people actually believed that? And honestly, that thought should make all of us slightly nervous. Because history never really ends. It just changes outfits. The Middle Ages weren't a collection of fools wandering through darkness. They were ordinary people trying to survive an unpredictable world with incomplete information. They loved, worried, feared, hoped, followed trends, copied each other, and searched desperately for certainty exactly like people do now. They laughed with friends. They worried about money. They cared what others thought about them. They tried to look successful. They wanted safety. They wanted happiness. The details changed. Human nature mostly didn't, which means the distance between us and them might be smaller than we like to imagine, because maybe history isn't really a story about the past at all. Maybe it's a warning disguised as entertainment, a quiet reminder that confidence and truth are not always the same thing, a reminder that crowds can be wrong, a reminder that repeating an idea does not magically improve it, and most importantly a reminder that normal things deserve questioning too. Because sometimes the most dangerous words in human history